Okay, Chair, when you're ready, we're live on YouTube. You can start the meeting. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to East Devon District Council's LED Monitoring Forum on the 6th of July 2021. I'd like to welcome anyone watching this meeting via the live stream. Members are here in the Council Chamber at Blackdown House with other participants taking part remotely. As well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded, so please bear this in mind throughout. May I remind you to be careful of your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting. I also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this meeting is dependent on the internet connection, in the event of a break in connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please make sure all mobile phones are turned off or on silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid background noise levels. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of all members here present. When your name is called, please unmute your microphone and confirm you are here. You are present by saying present at Blackdown House. When you have confirmed you're present, please mute your microphone again.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So we'll start with Councillor Arnott. Are you with us, Councillor Arnott? Okay, let's move on. Councillor Brewster Sarum.
Present in Blackdown House, thank you.
Thank you. Chair, take it you're present.
Present in Blackdown House.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hookway.
Present in Blackdown House, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johns, are you with us this evening? No, not picking her up remotely. Councillor Young.
Present in Blackdown House.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pook. Don't have Councillor Pook. Councillor Rowland.
Present in Blackdown House.
Thank you very much. So I'll go back to Councillor Arnott. Can I just confirm where you are, please?
Hello, yes, present, but not at Blackdown House.
You're in virtual mode. Thank you very much. Okay, Chair, I can confirm that you're Cora if you'd like to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Agenda item 1, public speaking. There are no members of the public registered to speak. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on 27th of April 2021. If there are any members with any comment on the minutes, please raise your electronic hand. If there are no issues, I assume that you're content that they are agreed. Thank you, everybody. Agenda item 3, apologies. Debbie, to confirm apologies, please.
Okay, Chair. So I have apologies from Councillor Alan Dent, Councillor John Loudon and Councillor Paul Hayward. And I'm going to add to that Councillor Vicky Johns, as it doesn't appear that she's joined us. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 is declarations of interest. This will be done by roll call.
Okay, if I can start with Councillor Arnott, please.
Member of LED.
Thank you very much. And that's a personal interest. Thank you. Councillor Brewster Sarum next, please.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
None, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway, please.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Yes, most of my family are members of LED, but I'm not.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Rowland, please.
None, thanks, Debbie.
Great. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. I think Councillor Moulding, did you want to make a declaration at this part?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I thought it would be appropriate for me to make a declaration. I'm not obviously on the forum, but if there are any discussions that relate to Cloakham Lawn, I think members are aware that currently Cloakham Lawn Sports Centre is in discussions with LED Community Leisure. Thank you.
Thank you. On to agenda item 5, matters of urgency. There are no matters of urgency. Agenda item 6, confidential and exempt items. There are 3 items which officers recommend should be dealt with in this way. And on to agenda item 7, LED update community wellbeing report, is a report by Peter Gilpin, the CEO of LED, please.
Chair, I've submitted a report which always surprises me, just how much we do in terms of outreach work. And the two ladies who do our outreach returned to work mid-May. So considering they've only been back a month, not even that, I think they're doing a tremendous job at getting activities going. I don't intend to go through the report line by line. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, or Jamie Bryant, my Director of Delivery, can answer because he manages the outreach team.
Thanks, Peter. Starting to look like you're getting away with this one, so I'll chip in with a question anyway. Just touching on the presence on the Cranbrook Move More group, I was just wondering, when you say presence, is that sort of quite a sedate role that the word presence implies, or is there an active capacity in that function?
Well, we sit on the group and we do have some activities in Cranbrook, but obviously we've tried to work in partnership with Cranbrook, the other deliverers there. There's also some activities delivered by Exeter City Council and by Exeter City Football Club's community outreach team as well. So Cranbrook's a bit of a mixed bag, but we're definitely sitting in on the meetings and we do have activities there. In fact, I think it was our mum's cycling group that we started there that led out the Tour of Britain twice in the last few years, as one example. So we are fairly involved there and trying our best to help with the development of activities in Cranbrook, which is a gap that needs developing.
Thank you. Councillor Young, please.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how things are progressing now we're coming out of COVID, and what are the sort of vibes coming from the members returning? Thank you.
Can we perhaps pass that one, Chair, until the report in the Part B, because Jamie's report covers a lot of that, and there's an update from him. Things have changed a bit even in the last week since the report was written. So if we could park that until, I think it's agenda item, I haven't got the agenda in front of me now, but Part B, 11B.
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 Yeah, are you happy with that, Councillor Young?
Yeah, it's just regarding these outreach now. Is there a lot of people coming, joining up with the outreach offers that we're doing, and is it as you would expect, and how does it compare with last year? Oh, not last year, but the year before, isn't it?
Well, Jamie can pick up in a bit more detail, but obviously, as I said, they've only been back less than a month. And what we find as well is a lot of our outreach work is targeted at the disadvantaged groups and the more vulnerable groups, particularly the elderly, a lot of disabled activities, and they're groups which are not rushing back. The ones who are rushing back are the fit and healthy ones who are coming into the gym and the studios. So they are picking up quite slowly. Jamie, do you want to perhaps add a bit more meat to the bone?
Yeah, that's, it's probably a fair response. I mean, to give you an idea on just numbers across the piece, really. I mean, April, just as to give you a feel. So average daily visits in April was just under 1,200 across the whole spectrum of activity. That increased to 1,500 in May. But to put that into context, that's about 50% of what we were seeing in 2019. So, from an overall patronage perspective, it's coming back, albeit you have got quite a lot of restriction in there. But it's coming back, but slowly. And again, I think as Peter said, there is a nervousness around certain populations still to return. We have a lot of dialogue with some of our customers who are still quite nervous about returning. And I think we've got about 400, for example, still on suspend until we're fully opened up post step 4.
I think the other issue, Councillor Young, is that a lot of our outreach activities, although they're managed by the outreach team, they're actually run by volunteers. So we have quite a lot of volunteers who run the walks and referee the walking football matches and things like that. And a lot of our volunteers are not coming back very quickly either. So that restricts the number of activities that we can run, as well as the social distancing restrictions. But obviously we got a bit of a encouragement from Boris yesterday, and I would hope that certainly by the time we meet in September, October, most of these activities will be fully active again.
Thanks. John Golding.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to say it's great to see the breadth of activity that's going on here, because this fits in so well with our public health strategy and some of the health and wellbeing ambitions we have. And for me, it's a demonstration that leisure's not all about sport and activity that goes on in leisure centres and pools and such like. So really pleased to see the programme rejuvenated, because I think it's an important part of the overall offer that LED make. Thanks to the team for that through Peter.
Thanks, John. No, I think that's a really good point, actually. It's easy to think sport, but obviously it's much bigger than that, really, that sits in this. Okay, looks like we're ready to move on. So I'll pick up agenda item 8, the SOPG diagnostic highlights, and that's strategic leisure. So Rachel or Liz, I'll hand over to you.
I think I'm doing this one. I don't know whether I'm able to put up the presentation on my screen, whether I'll give it a go.
I'll just make you a co-host, Liz, and then that will allow you access to share your screen.
I'll put my glasses on whilst I'm waiting, so I can see what I'm doing.
No, that's okay. So you're a co-host now, Liz. So share your screen when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, can you see that? Is that coming up on people's screens? No?
Nope.
Hang on, let me show it through. Right.
There it goes.
Okay, let me put that on full screen. Okay, so I've been asked this evening to provide you with an overview of the SOP Diagnostic Report that we've been asked to present for East Devon District Council. And this work basically follows on from the work that we were doing with LED open book account monitoring earlier in the year. And a couple of observations were made as part of that work that we were undertaking, which I've listed in the first slide there. Basically, the main one is that there is currently no leisure strategy with a clear vision and priorities for the district. And that means that LED has nothing to align its services to. And I think we made mention to earlier in the meeting this evening that we do have a public health strategy for East Devon, and that is essentially what LED have been reverting to in the absence of a leisure strategy. The other thing that we've also mentioned in the meeting already is about outreach work, which clearly there's some really excellent outreach work undertaken by LED, and it's clearly valued by the council, but at the moment it's not formalised within the contract you have with the trust, and that'd be something that'd be really useful to have. And then from then on, we could introduce formal KPIs within the contract, where there could be outreach KPIs, against those vision and priorities as well. So at the moment, I know that LED do produce KPIs and share those with the LED monitoring forum, but we may want to review those in the light of any leisure strategy coming forward. Another big one is dual use facilities, which I'll refer to a bit further on in this presentation, and the cost of those dual use facilities. At the moment, there are 6 dual use sites within the contract. Those facilities are beginning to show their age. I think they were all they all commenced in the 1980s. Most leisure facilities have an average age span of between 35 and 40 years. And I think the majority of those dual use sites are probably reaching the end of their useful life and costing the authority quite a great deal to look after. And in effect, it means that a non-statutory service is propping up a statutory service at the moment. The other thing I've listed here is about playing pitch strategy. So at the moment, there's no up-to-date playing pitch strategy, and I know the council is looking to address that internally at the present, so that's good news. Other things worth mentioning is that there's been a political change. There's a new administration, a new coalition, and potentially new direction of travel, more review and analysis of the leisure operators as a result of that, and the LED Monitoring Forum is an example of that change. I've also mentioned there's a new emerging local plan, 2021 to 2040. The existing plan identifies housing developments of up to 17,100 homes by 2031, particularly in East Devon's West End area, which includes the new town of Cranbrook, which we've just been talking about, where the majority of housing growth will take place. So this new local plan will replace the existing one. At the bottom of this slide, I mentioned the SOPG diagnostic process. It's a bit of a mouthful and it sounds like it's quite complicated, but it's not. It's basically something that Sport England have introduced as an aid basically to local authorities who are potentially seeking funding for new facilities. I think there have been cases where local authorities have made an approach for capital funding and there hasn't been a proper due diligence undertaken. There's been a lack of insight and a lack of evidence base, and so they've had to go back to the drawing board and resubmit. So I think this diagnostic is to ensure that the local authorities take the appropriate steps and follow the appropriate processes as well. And there's 4 key processes that we have to adopt. One is outcomes, so basically developing shared sport and physical activity outcomes for the district. The second is insight, which is basically understanding your community needs and behaviours. Third one is interventions, which is how can your shared outcomes be achieved. And the fourth one is an important one, is commitment. So basically securing commitment, investment for achieving your outcomes. So I'll move on to the next slide. So just as part of the report, we look at the demographics for East Devon, and there's a few interesting ones. You have an ageing population. So at the moment you have 30.4% over the age of 65, and this is due to rise to 37% by 2043. And this will lead to increased demands on care, health services and housing. So it's quite important because there's a role for sport and physical activity in there, and basically keeping people active for longer and putting less pressure on those services going forward. It's also a relatively prosperous district with low unemployment levels, but there are pockets of deprivation, and these are essentially in the main towns of Honiton and Exmouth. More people are moving into the district than out, which again is going to lead to population growth. There's high home ownership and car ownership. There's growing levels of obesity in reception age children and low activity levels in reception age children as well. But on a positive side, there are relatively low levels of obesity and inactivity in adults, which is good news for the council. So the report goes into detail about the LED leisure contract. It's an interesting contract. It's a large contract. There's a large number of facilities. We've got 6 dual use sites, 3 leisure centres, outdoor facilities, and also a theatre to boot. So that's quite a broad range coverage, and outreach provision on top of that, which isn't included in the contract. There's no provision in Seaton or Cranbrook included in the contract at the moment, although LED does have a gym in Seaton itself. Back in 2004, an external management options appraisal was undertaken by external consultants, and in that it recommended the establishment of a new MPDO, which, and out of that, basically LED formed, which is the trust. A 30-year contract was agreed. There is an unusual financial payment mechanism included in this contract, in that it's a 5-year fixed service fee, which is then reviewed every 5 years. There's no account taken of RPI or other things like utility price increases, government legislation, which could include sort of national living wage and things of that nature. So it's been quite a challenge for LED to sort of manage that and anticipate what could or could not happen in that forthcoming 5 years. It's been very financially successful as well, particularly in the early years, where on the first negotiation, I think it was 1,155,000 was agreed per annum for the first 5 years of the contract, and that represented a saving to the council of over 300,000. It's certainly in the first year of that arrangement. And the same service fee was agreed for the second 5-year period from 2011 to 16. But then there was the comprehensive service review, and LED voluntarily agreed to reduce that figure down to £893,717. And it's remained at that amount through to today as we speak. So that's quite a reduction over the period of time that we're talking, particularly without taking RPI into account. And we do feel that it's important there is a review of the financial payment mechanism going forward with LED. There's also other things to take into account. Maintenance. So at the moment, the council has the lion's share of the maintenance responsibilities, although LED is responsible for smaller minor maintenance. The council picks up the majority, and it's costing just over £400,000 per annum to the council. So if you take that together with the service fee, that's 1.6 million per annum that this contract is costing the council. On top of that, the council's projected a capital spend, certainly in the next 5 years, of 1.554 million and 22.8 million over 30 years. So a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it has to do with the ageing stock of facilities that the council now has, and particularly those dual use sites. But also it's the makeup of East Devon. You have quite a few relatively small town populations, so there's not much scope for income generation. You've got a finite population, and that's probably why when we look at gyms, for example, very few national gym operators have come into this area, and we've found the same in Cornwall as well, where we've been working recently, because they just don't find it that stacks up financially for them because of the low population areas. I've also put at the bottom of this slide that there has been changes in the leisure industry in recent years. The way people participate in physical activity, I think COVID's a great example. You know, we've all adapted, done different things, and it's quite difficult to come back. And Peter was just mentioning there that, you know, those that are fit and healthy, they're keen to get back through the doors, but it's the more vulnerable groups that are a bit more reluctant to make that return. But also people are wanting different things. They've got different standards, expectations of what a leisure centre should provide. And it's a bit challenging whether particularly those dual use sites are meeting that need. And you also need to take into account that those dual use sites don't have full community access 24/7. Only 3 of the leisure centres in the LED portfolio have full community pay and play access. So the council does need to decide what priority it places on that going forward as a council. The other thing that's lacking, I suppose, at the moment is we don't really know what the residents of East Devon want or what they're doing in terms of leisure. And I think there should be a community survey undertaken so that we gain the views of both users of the leisure facilities and non-users as well. And I am aware that LED do get customer feedback from their customers, but I think we need to spread the net wider and get more of an overview of the population as a whole. So I won't go through dual use provision again, because I think I've covered most of the things in that list, but I think it is worth mentioning about community outreach, because LED does do a great deal in that respect, and that is highlighted in the reports that I've produced. They've got 1 full-time community outreach officer, although it's 2 posts, 2 post equivalents. They do a lot of programs. They also get a lot of external funding, particularly for the programs, in excess of 100k per annum, which is really good news. But those grants don't necessarily cover the cost of the post. So quite rightly, LED have highlighted the cost of that post to the authority and have separated it out so that it's clearly identified within their accounts going forward. Something I've put at the bottom of this slide as well is in view of what's going on with Sport England and their new strategy called Uniting the Movement. There is a review of their active partnerships across England and their role and what they should be doing going forward. And I think this should be looked at in conjunction with what LED are doing on the ground in terms of community outreach, because it may be that going forward, there may be some overlap in terms of what they're doing. So my final slide is basically to summarise what the key recommendations are from this report. The priority is to have a leisure strategy with vision, or I've put vision there, but it should be vision and key objectives for East Devon. We also need an up-to-date evidence-based assessment of individual sports facility needs to inform the emerging local plan. This evidence-based assessment will be integral to the leisure strategy, so that the 2 will be in the same document. The local plan, the emerging local plan, it's really important that we know what housing projections we're talking about going forward, because this will help us calculate the number and range of facilities that are needed and where. We also need a community survey, which will provide insight and inform the leisure strategy. We need a bit more consultation with key stakeholders. I'd particularly like to talk further with the planning department and Active Devon. I didn't manage to get hold of them during this initial report. We need the provision of bespoke facility planning models to inform the leisure strategy. Right, facility planning models, and I've written it down here because I'm sure somebody asked me what they are, if I've got this somewhere. So basically these assess whether the capacity of the existing facilities are capable of meeting current and future demand for a particular sport. And that they tend to produce modelling for swimming pools and sports halls. I think we might need more bespoke modelling because of the nature of this district, and that's for future discussion going forward. We've mentioned about the playing pitch strategy update. We need a comprehensive review of all of the dual use agreements. I know this has started looking at Colleton dual use site, but we feel that this should be done across the board. I've mentioned here that we do recommend that we undertake a market testing exercise to determine if the leisure contract continues to represent value for money for East Devon. And finally, we do think there should be a review of the service fee arrangement with LED and consider introducing an annual management fee index linked for the remaining period of the contract. That is a whistle-stop tour through the report. I've just highlighted some of the key issues there and key recommendations, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Just as a pointer, I think it's important to say that there is a detailed report, I think, that sits behind this that will be circulated to members once it's finalised. I think this is all as Liz says, a whistle-stop tour of the highlighted version. So open up to questions. I'll go with Councillor Miller first, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Liz, for the detailed report. One key word I took out of that in terms of the contract was unusual, and that raises some issues with me. And I think we need to, I mean, in my view, I think the council needs to look back at the contract, potentially through scrutiny, to look at this, because that certainly worries me. I know also that the fact we have no playing pitch strategy. We need to get that done, and I've been trying to lobby for that. And of course, our leisure strategy has run out of date, and I'm really glad the new administration has grasped the nettle to get this underway. My question is on sort of, and it's a broad question, is on timelines with this leisure strategy. Given how complex it is and how much work we need to do, how long do you think, and I apologise in advance if it's somewhere in the report or in previous reports, how long do you envisage it's going to take for us to create this leisure strategy? Will it be next 2 years? Will it be 3 years? But roughly would be a really good idea to know how long it might take for us to get to the finish line when it comes to this new strategy. But before I finish, I just want to thank you again for what's a really, really interesting report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of timescale, depending on if we were appointed, we would be probably looking ideally at 6 to 7 month time frame for a leisure strategy. So certainly not 2 to 3 years, because by the time we finished it, everything would be out of date again. So no, we would hope to act quickly, and so that you can, and for it to fall in line with your emerging local plan as well, because we might actually hold them up if we don't get it done relatively quickly.
Thanks, Liz. Councillor Dasaran, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Yeah, Liz, that was a very, as Councillor Miller said, a very detailed report. I just have a couple of quick points that I've noted from it that I think the key issue is what residents want in terms of their leisure in this survey that you're going to do. And also I think that the market testing exercise to determine if the leisure contract continues to represent value for money. So I think those two are intrinsically tied up together, because once we know what people actually want from their leisure, we'll then be able to determine as a council how effective it is. And I just wonder whether you say you're doing a market testing exercise, are you testing that against other gyms and other outside non-LED organisations, please?
I think I will pass over to Rachel on the market testing, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you. Is it okay to come in now, Councillor?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so on the market testing, the reason that we're suggesting it is three main reasons, really. One is the market has changed a lot since your original contract was set up and the parameters were established for that. So we think it's worth re-looking in those terms, really, at exactly what you've just said, is what is it the council wants to provide and how do we do that most effectively, not cost effectively, most effectively, because that will deliver best value. And then we can compare that against other councils and other similar facilities, it is important to say that leisure is an incredibly difficult thing to benchmark, because every local authority starts from a different perspective, you know, different number of facilities, the age of facilities, different populations, etc. But we would look to do that, not because we think there's anything, you know, drastically wrong with the current arrangement. We just want to see whether it can be improved, or whether, you know, it needs to be changed in any way to future-proof it, really. So I think that probably picks up all of your points. I think the second big reason for looking at it is that COVID has changed everything again. And, you know, although the sector is recovering reasonably well, what's that going to look like in another 6 months? You know, what is going to happen to people who've been taking part in activities outside? Are they going to come back indoors when the winter strikes? So we need to look at the feedback and the, from the community, and then look at what that means for your offer moving forward. And I think also the third point I would say is that it's really important to think about the sustainability of the model that you have and LED. They've done a great job over the last few years, but as Liz has highlighted, you know, there are a few unusual aspects to the contract because of when it was set up and how it was set up, and we just need to revisit those to make sure that East Devon and your delivery partner have that sustainable model moving forward. And if I could just add something about the timescale, I mean, I agree with Liz in broad terms in terms of the timescale. The only caveat I would add is that depending on the length of time you want the community survey to be out there. So if it's out there for a month, that sort of 7 months or so is fine. If you wanted it out there for a longer period, say 2 or 3 months, which is what some local authorities want, obviously that's going to have a knock-on impact on the timescale. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Young, please.
Thank you, Chair. In the report, and thank you very much for the very detailed report, it does say about a lot of the buildings are getting to their end of life. I can see there's going to be a lot of costs involved in either updating them or replacing them. So I've got some worries about that. Consultations, we seem to have consultation after consultation. I noticed that residents are mentioning on Facebook yet another consultation. Could we have a leisure and play pitch strategy in one consultation rather than two? Can they be amalgamated? And if if the consultation leads to wonderful ideas, isn't that going to be a problem when we come to look at our finances and we can't deliver half the things that people want? Thank you.
Councillor, if I could just come back on the first point. Yes, I understand entirely about having survey overload. And yes, we could amalgamate the plain pitch strategy and the leisure strategy consultation, no problem with that. I think in terms of, I think it's all about what you ask your public without raising expectations, I guess. So as long as we can manage the questioning so that because they'll all put down that we'd like a 50-metre pool, thank you very much. So we're conscious of that. So I think we can certainly control that situation so that the right questions are asked. But it's also about behaviours, not just what facilities they want to see. We want to understand what they're doing at the moment, and if they're not exercising and if they're not using the facilities, why are they not using them? That's not so much raising their expectations, but it's just getting a better holistic view of what people are doing in East Devon.
Thank you for that.
Thanks. Councillor Rowland, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Liz, for your report. Just to echo what other people have said, I was going to ask about the timescales, but that's been covered already. I think it is important that we do complete that leisure strategy as soon as possible, taking into account the public consultation as well. But I would like to see that telescope down into perhaps a month's time frame, because you probably get most of the response quite quickly before it starts tailing off over a longer period of time anyway. My specific question, I was interested to see when you mentioned about the key factors and challenges for East Devon, and particularly where you mentioned about the current age demographic over 65s, what it's projected to be. This does chime with me because I had put a lot of this information as well into another business plan, totally unconnected with this for another subject. But my question is really around, even within East Devon, there are vast differences in that ageing profile. If you take Cranbrook at one extreme with different challenges, and then if you look at the seaside towns such as Sidmouth and Seaton, their older age demographic is even much higher than that as well. So no doubt you have got that information that could be brought out into the report, because again, I think that influences the sort of facilities that are needed in different areas, even within East Devon, which in itself is a huge challenge because of the largely rural nature and what you've already mentioned about the relatively small populations of towns, excluding Exmouth, of course.
Yes, yeah, we do take the uniqueness of each town into consideration. Cranbrook is a great example because I think it's got a very unusual demographic, quite very young, lots of young families there, and I think that's. I know Peter's team have been working in Cranbrook in terms of outreach, and some of their activities reflect that young family demographic. So yes, and we certainly take in the specifics of each town into consideration.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, and thanks for letting me come back, because I did forget one point and one question. And it was firstly just to say I totally agree with what Liz said about public consultation, that it should include people that don't use the facilities as much as it, includes people that do. And actually, I would go further and say it's actually even more important to reach people that don't use our facilities. I think, it's all about trying to reduce health inequalities and encourage people who really need to use the facilities to use it. And I think we need to design this public consultation in a very careful way. As a council, we've had various consultations which have not been responded to by many people. And I wonder whether we need to look at trying to do a consultation in a different way. Some members might think I'm kind of going pie in the sky on this, but many other councils across the country are starting to do a kind of, they're starting to do a citizens assembly style of consultation, where you actually meet people and you have, like a Zoom meeting similar to this. And it can be a lot more engaging and a lot more informative than, the written kind of consultation that we're used to. So, I just wanted to raise that point and to say that I think, the public consultation is massively important, and the way we design it is important. And the people, we need to reach the kind of people who aren't necessarily members of LED already. We need to be reaching people who are, that should be using our facilities, and actually, as a a local authority, we should be reaching people who we want to be, reaching. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Could I just come back on that? I concur with what you're saying, Councillor. I might be speaking out of turn, Rachel, but I understand that we have done consultation in sort of small forum setups in groups, because sometimes you can get more qualitative information from doing that. The other thing is that we will be reliant on yourselves and council officers to advise us on groups that are out there in East Devon that we can use and send the link to the survey to. We can approach the schools but we can approach organisations like Age UK, disability groups, and the like. So it's just, we'd like to see like a spider effect where it's just all going out to a range of groups, so that we try and, because I'm always amazed what groups are out there. That's, you know, some I've never come across. So, so yeah, we will need your help and support in that respect.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzard, please.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being late. Yeah, I would agree with what Councillor Miller has said, is that we must really look how we go about doing consultations. And I mean, roadshows have been a very good example of how we've consulted with various projects before. So maybe that may be a good idea to look at. And I would also agree with what Councillor Young had to say about, I think it would make sense to have the playing field pitch and leisure strategy to go out together, because you know, it's all about the same thing. But what I was interested in, and just for me, I mean, you did say, Liz, that this is an unusual contract. I was just wondering, could you just give me an example of why it's an unusual contract, please?
Only in as much as I don't think Rachel and I had ever cut when we were looking at monitoring of LED accounts, and we were monitoring accounts for a number of local authorities across the country, different operators, and we hadn't come across a contract arrangement where it was a 5-year fixed fee, then reviewed. That's the only meaning when I say unusual. that's my meaning when I said that.
Thanks, Liz. Councillor Hookway, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Liz, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. I've made particular mental note about your comments about population growth and incorporating within the local plan facilities that's going to accommodate that in terms of leisure. And we've also picked up on the issue that some of the facilities are aging. So looking for the future, how should we think about identifying those places where we are going to add new leisure facilities, which may be completely new for new population growth, new housing developments, or to replace the existing facilities? And I'm thinking about, should we stay within towns? Should we have facilities within towns? Or should we think about having a much larger site where we have a very large number of facilities all on site, which serves a much larger area? How are other local authorities looking at this for the future, please?
Oh, that's a big question. It varies, is the answer, and it may be a combination of both those suggestions that you said. A large might be one large leisure centre covering a wider area, and then, or one smaller centre and then a few other outlying facilities, smaller size facilities. It's difficult to answer that at the moment till we've sort of moved on to the next stage. I don't know whether Rachel, you can add any more to that. You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, Councillor, I think how we'd suggest approaching it is, it's really important for the council to be clear about what it is you want sport and physical activity to do. How do you want it to contribute to your corporate priorities, your community's health and well-being, etc.? Because you could, in one extreme, you could say, well, actually, it's a discretionary service. We don't need to provide any of it. You know, everyone can just sort themselves out. If you did that, you'd be the first local authority in the UK not to provide any facilities. That's probably at one extreme. Or you could say at the other extreme, we're just going to provide this everything for everybody. That's clearly unaffordable and unsustainable. So we need to have some guidance from you politically, really, as to what your priorities are for it. And some local authorities have chosen to go down a kind of hub and spoke approach, which is kind of what you're suggesting. Yep. I think the challenge with that in an area like East Devon is you've got a huge area with a relatively dispersed population. You've got some larger areas, some larger urban areas, but lots of smaller communities. And then accessibility becomes an issue, doesn't it? Because public transport is always limited. So I think, you know, you could have a hub and spoke, you could have a provide everything everywhere, or you could have maybe some strategically located facilities complemented by smaller facilities, which might actually, you might already actually have. So it might mean better use of things like village halls and community centres. Clearly they wouldn't have a pool in them, but you know, pools, it's really difficult to sustain swimming pools for communities of less than 10,000. And I think I'm just gonna put it out there, because we haven't done the work yet, but I think councillors probably do need to just have a think about moving forward, whether you simply want to carry on providing everything that you currently do, or whether you want to be proactive and kind of say, our communities are different now from when these facilities were first built. Perhaps they need different facilities, you know, different things in these buildings than we provided them with in the past. That's a very brave and bold thing to do, but other local authorities are doing it. And a typical example would be the provision of sports halls, because lots of schools have sports halls. And if you were going to leave something out of a sort of physical activity facility, you could leave a sports hall out. You can't leave fitness out if you have water, because you need it to subsidise it. But a lot of local authorities are choosing to build new facilities which have multi-purpose space as opposed to a standard sports hall. So there's just some things to think about, but it is difficult. And I think the age of your buildings is going to be a factor, as one of the councillors alluded to earlier, because to replace everything you've got now would be very expensive. And I think it's the right time to question what it is you're providing moving forward, and where's the evidence base for that need.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thanks. I think you've stumbled upon the most fundamental question regarding this whole part of where we're at the moment. And it is really a question probably for members as well, to just have a proper think about, what do our communities want going forward? What's fit for purpose? What's right for them? And how are we actually going to afford whatever we decide to do? And that could lead to questions elsewhere down the line at some point. Speaking of how can we afford things, Simon Davey.
Thank you, Chair. It's moved on slightly from the conversation, but it might come back. In terms of the unusual contract and the fixed-year fix that's been mentioned, in conversations I've had with Strategic Leisure, I think, and I'm sure they can expand upon it themselves, but it is that 5-year fixed. And I think it's the balance of risk that's the unusual element perhaps within that, in that it being 5-year fixed, LED are taking on all the risk of what inflation does, what electricity or water costs, or what employee costs are. So they're having to factor that in to their 5-year fixed fee. East Devon, the council side, has sort of bought out that risk then through that contract. But the opposite side to that is it could be an overpriced contract because of those risks being built in. And it's whether there's more, I think perhaps contracts generally have a more shared balance of that risk going forward. Would that be, through the chair, would that be fair, Liz, in terms of what you're suggesting there?
Yes. So, and I think things like the national living wage, which I think Peter's referred to previously, nobody foresaw that. So they've had to take that on, and they've had to take the risk of things like that coming into being during the course of the 5-year period, which is really difficult. And I suppose that the council likewise has had to take the risk on the maintenance of the facilities as well, and things going wrong. So I think the contract could be better set up, and the more normal approach is a management fee arrangement, which is RPI linked, an annual RPI increase year on year.
I think, Liz, it's probably fair to say, isn't it, that one of the reasons we are raising it is because risk is critical, Simon, and all the councillors moving forward, and risk has come to the fore during COVID because everybody's been faced with risks that they didn't know were going to happen. And I think from an operator's perspective, I mean, every operator is now less inclined to take on risk for obvious reasons, but equally councils don't want to be stuck with a financial risk of having to bail operators out again. I don't mean that negatively, you know, that's just been the situation over the last 15 months or so, but there needs to be a reappraisal of the risks involved in the management of leisure facilities, and that itself can only be informed by understanding what it is that you need to provide, as Councillor Hawkins just said, and it may not be what you're currently providing. I know that's politically difficult and challenging because no one wants to talk about losing facilities or rationalisation or anything, but sometimes it is actually the best thing to do. Sorry.
Thanks. If that's on the note, I think there is certainly a discussion to have about the fee, because I don't necessarily know that structure of the 5-year things fit for purpose for LED or EDDC, and I'm not going to put anyone on the spot to answer that hanging question, but if I can just leave it out there for LED and officers just have a think about developing that conversation, please. Councillor Arnott, please.
Thanks, Chair. So first of all, I'd like to thank you and Councillor Miller, who from memory were instrumental in getting us towards sports strategy to do this leisure strategy. And it's been incredibly important as part of the work of the monitoring forum, which has only been going, I think, what, not much more than a year, has it? Perhaps even less. So this to me is a seminal piece of work, and I'm very grateful to Liz for having done a few of these appalling next slide please things. That was a brilliant digest of what you found and what you think we need, and to Rachel as well for some very you know, get some cold water advice there, which I think we need to hear. So I just like to throw in a couple of very quick examples, taking me as the Olympian sporting figure you can see in front of you. So if I go swimming, I go to Axminster, which is run entirely by a charity that has nothing whatsoever to do with LED, and they're on their own. And that's, you know, in a way they've hit trouble because of it. If I coach a football team, which I used to do lots in Colleton, I use playing fields that are owned by the parish council and a changing room owned by the parish council. We ran when I did it, a regionally important youth soccer tournament. You know, just activity for thousands of people over the weekend. And East Devon and LED were nowhere near it, just nowhere near any of that at all. And my wife is out at the moment. She's out at LED. She's up at Colleton Grammar School doing press ups or whatever it is they get up to these days. But I'm very struck that what her friends are doing, and those, she wouldn't mind me saying, younger than her, the key fitness thing they're doing around here is the park run on Seaton Seafront on a Saturday morning. And again, that has nothing to do with us whatsoever. And what I hope is that however this survey is done and however we identify the key stakeholders, and that's always crucial, isn't it? You know, who are your principal witnesses? We really absorb all of that information so that we can get a very universal picture of where it is. If it's the case that, in other words, there may be another way around of doing this in the medium term, that it isn't so building based, but it is us leading and getting others, hoping LED or whoever, to lead on helping to implement what should be national health strategy or national sport guidance or whatever. So it doesn't, I mean, it does seem, doesn't it, the big, you know, the elephant in the room is the vast amount of money we're going to have to spend on these buildings. We haven't got the money. I wish we had. We haven't got it, and we will never have it unless that's raised by at the whim of government on some new scheme, or, you know, the kind of sports encouragement fund of 2025 or something announced by Johnson before he does absolutely nothing. Then this is going to be problematic. So I'm really encouraged that this. I'm really proud of this council that we've opened this discussion properly, and I'm very much hoping that we can work going on, of course, with LED, but all of these questions, how sport is going to be actually done by real people in the future, are key. And there is a threat, and we know this, that can we afford to be in the area where we're running gyms, really, the kind of gyms where you do, weight training and all this kind of stuff, where there are people who want to compete on that in the private sector, in, cheaper. That it may not be as good. It may be that the coaches aren't as good. I don't know. They may be excellent. But that might be something, the kind of protein shake people, that may be the thing that the private sector, more private sector should be doing. And that what we should be looking at is how to increase, and I hate to say this cliche, but it is the health and well-being of the people of East Devon through engagement with sport. And so as you move forward, Liz and Rachel, please just consider this a blank piece of paper, and I hope you're encouraged to do that, and don't feel you have to go along the tram lines of what's been for the last, however, 5 years or whatever. Let's, what's it called? It was called blue sky thinking in the 90s, wasn't it? Some of that. Anyway, thank you, Chair.
Thank you again. I think you made some great points there, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the whole idea of the strategy is it's very holistic. It's looking at what we do and what others do in that area, and the idea is to pull it all together and to be like, EDDC don't need to be doing everything for everyone because we've got this great provider that covers that need there. Let's just help support them where we need to. I think we've wrapped up on that point, and we will move on to agenda item 9, which I feel is the part we've been really waiting for now, and that is developing a leisure strategy. And I'll hand over to Charlie.
Thanks, Chair. I think you summarised very neatly what I was going to say. I think listening to the discussions, I think it's pretty sort of self-evident that we need a leisure strategy, and we're all, I think at that point, we followed the sequential approach from Sport England, which was to develop the diagnostic assessment, and the next step following their framework guidance is to develop a leisure strategy. So hopefully we're all in agreement on that. Obviously, we'll find out in a second. A couple of things to give some reassurance. We will be exploring very actively with Sport England for some funding support to help us deliver this strategy, so the financial burden doesn't fall exclusively on us. There's obviously an indicative figure that we put together, having discussed with Simon for preparing it, but having had a quick chat with Rachel and Liz, I think we're reasonably confident we'll be able to draw some funding down from Sport England, circa, I think, without holding Liz's feet to the fire, around about 5,000 to 10,000. Hopefully we could sort of draw down from Sport England. I think it's obviously in their interests, that we prepare this this document, this strategy, because they are obviously bought into what we're trying to achieve here. So I'd hope that there's a fairly compelling argument we can put to them and put to them forcefully. So just to reassure forum members that we'll be looking to do that. And really, it's just from our perspective, if Debbie can work her absolute magic, which I know she can. And she's done many times because she's excellent. So if we could get the minutes of this meeting onto the July cabinet meeting coming up, and that can then synchronise obviously with the council meeting later on at the end of this month, so that we've got a very seamless transition here from agreeing to produce the strategy, getting that signed off through cabinet onto council, so we don't have a rather unnecessary delay between now through the summer till September. We can sort of crack on. So that would be from an officer's perspective, having sort of chatted with Simon about this. I think that's what we'd like to do. So that's really all I've got to say on that. But I think as I said, I think the discussions we've had so far is pretty self-evident that we need to get moving with this exercise quickly. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Charlie. And you've touched on there as well about why we had today as a physical meeting, was to really get this over the line if members are in agreement. So Councillor Rowland, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Charlie. Without further ado, and having heard everything that's already been said, which I have no intention of repeating. For all those very good reasons, and going very back to a point that John Golding made as well, right at the very beginning, about how important all this is, not just from a sports point of view, but for the health and well-being of all our residents. I'd actually like to move the recommendation as it reads in the paper, so that we do ask Cabinet to make a recommendation to Council.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. I think we've debated kind of around this quite a bit. Councillor Young, did you want to make a point? No, perfect, thank you. On that basis then, I'm happy to, let's just take this straight through to a vote. Debbie, are we still doing it with ticks and crosses? Or?
Yeah, please. So members of the forum who are in Blackdown House, please, if you could please use your green ticks, red crosses, or raise your hand if you're abstaining. And I have, who have we got in the room? That's a unanimous vote for those in the room, Chair. So that recommendation is carried. Thank you.
Thank you. And then on to agenda item 10, exclusion of press and public, that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public, including the press, be excluded from the meeting as exempt information of description set out in the agenda is likely to be disclosed, and on the balance, the public interest is in discussing this item in private session part B. Members, Debbie will now run a vote to confirm your agreement to move to a private session.
You're good at this, Sam.
So again, members, if you could just use your green ticks or red crosses. Thank you very much. So, Chair, that's confirmed. We'll go to a private session. I'll just put the slide up and I'll let members know when we are off air, as it were. Thank you.